us and teach us directly as they used to do. We are literally quarantined. We are literally quarantined by the keepers of the time, the keepers of the civilization on Earth. We're like fenced in a very small cubicle of reality to experience how would it feel to live in a world with such distorted beliefs as the ones we have. Another genuine first-hand witness report from ancient Egypt, I consider the case of a young priestess, which has been described in detail in the books of, I believe, Brian Weiss, which I have been recommended already so many times in my videos. They are available for free on internet. Another potential source of preserved ancient knowledge through oral tradition till current date used to be Abdul Hakim, who passed a couple of decades ago. According to him, the ancient Egyptians used to call their land Kemet. That's why his disciples have substituted Egyptology with Kemetology. In addition, what we call Egyptian hieroglyphs was actually a Sufi language. That's how the Kemites used to call it themselves. And according to him as well, this was a civilization which spread over continents. It wasn't a local thing. And he also described its fall down as a gradual rotting process from inside, during which the truth and the powerful magic abilities were gradually subdued by corrupt priests. Hakim taught his disciples, according to him, the true meaning of many hieroglyphs and the true symbols for various things according to the Chemicians / ancient Egyptians. But since, unfortunately, from what I can see so far, forgive me, I'm not a specialist in this field of chematology that they have created, practically an entire new branch of study. So sadly, in this lineage, it seems that most of the knowledge has been lost with time, and whatever has survived, like meaning of magical symbols, doesn't seem to be enough to activate enough magical powers to create really steady bridges through time with ancient Egypt, to the degree that an information will be channeled and then verified as accurate. Like a simple example, like with Seti. She said, dig and dig here and you will find this and that. And they dug and they found exactly the ruins she talked about. Another book which was recommended to me as a potential source of genuine knowledge is the book Initiation, allegedly written by Elizabeth Hyde. So I started reading it, and in the beginning it looked okay. Then I started noticing few funny moments which made the story less and less credible. But then when she started quoting allegedly conversations and talks given by an ancient Egyptian priests, which were actually passages of Vedic teachings from India and other from the Buddhist world, then I realized this is not channeled from ancient Egypt. And by the way, in the preface it was implied that it is not even written by Elizabeth Hyde. Anyhow, and a few other dodgy things about that book. So as an inspirational writing to encourage you to understand the astral, most definitely. But as information channeled from ancient Egypt, absolutely not. as far as absolute dating in terms of years, the way we understand them, it seems that many, if not all, of the allegedly very ancient Egyptian dynasties, 3,000-4,000 years old, actually existed after Christ, because there is so much Bible stuff on them. By which I don't imply even the slightest that the glorious Egyptian civilization is younger in general, because how far back in time it spreads, that we have no clue at all. We don't even have a clue if our method of understanding time was applicable back then, but more about that later. It seems that the situation of the ruins which we are shown is something like shown on this illustration, although this is a completely different style. We are shown only what is on the top from the most recent dynasties, and everything else is under ban. They just don't want to dig. There are laws in modern Egypt which restrict people very much, even when they make graves for their dead relatives. Even then they have to dig only shallow graves, even if it is far away from any historic site. Even local Egyptian historians and tour guides, they are also perplexed themselves. On one side, it's like we all want to know the history, and then we don't dig even at places where we are sure to find ruins. And by the way, one of the reasons for which they are showing us relatively recent stuff and telling us that it is very, very old is to discourage us from inquiring into the really, really deep historic layers, because we have them all figured out. If you remember from the previous episodes, what did they find? 30 meters deep in the ground. Cemetery of many red-haired Caucasian mummies. Oops, that's wrong. Such things should not be found in Egypt. That's why digging is not allowed there. And this tactic of putting much older dates to relatively recent sites, that is a very widely used trick. Now, some examples from other parts of the world. Look at this brickwork. Does it look like well over 2,000 years old to you? That's its official dating, because this, my dear friends, is Babylon, the famous Babylon, before it got discovered. So at this point there is no question of reconstruction, because this is like buried site. Yes, exactly, buried. That's the impression they're trying to create. Here they are giving even a description of how hard were they digging, and yet on this photograph of the site before discovery, we see a slope here and a palm is growing on the slope. In other words, this brickwork was out there, exposed to the elements. It wasn't dug out from the ground, but they're exaggerating how much were actually they digging and cleaning, just to avoid this uncomfortable moment that if the work was indeed that old, it wouldn't be in such good condition. Now this is a Sumerian ziggurat, again officially well over 2,000 years old. Again an image taken at the time when no restoration has been done. Suspiciously high level of preservation of too many of the bricks. Loose bricks piles on the right, just laying like that without any mortar. That would make them even more susceptible to erosion, and yet they look like as if somebody was just working on the construction here some decades ago, if not a couple of years ago, and for some reason they left. It really gives the overall impression of a recently abandoned construction site, not something that got destroyed. And again, this is an image at the time it was discovered. Excavated. What kind of excavation? I mean, this is absolutely ground level. The spare bricks are still lying around. Even that is not covered by what they call cultural layers. And yet, thousands of buildings which are dated to very recent periods, like a couple of 100 years old, those are under 5-6 meters of cultural layers. That's how they call it. Actually, it's nothing else but clay, which again, according to mainstream sources, it's just like this byproduct of time, dust falls and things form. So why dust was not falling here for 2000 years? And let's get back to Egypt, where as close as 1000 years ago, still there was a very advanced culture. That date is taken from a very reliable regression record by Brian Weiss. But when I say they were advanced, I really don't think they had any electronics similar to ours, a statement which is also based on various sources. And yet, although they didn't have our type of electronics, in general, I would call them more developed than us, even technologically, because they could accomplish more than us. In terms of building convenient and beautiful homes, in terms of healthcare, most definitely in terms of art, and in addition to that, they were far more informed than us in terms of cosmology. And as far as when was dynastic Egypt founded, or when was the Sphinx or the Great Pyramid built, I would say no reliable source at this time, and even we don't know if our way of counting and filling time was applicable back then. First of all, if you have listened to the interview with Peter Petrov, when I asked him about dating, he raised this point first. He said, I'm not even sure the time was moving the way it does now. Because so many people, so many clients, when he puts them under regression and they get transported to another time, he asks them when is that. And when he goes in the older layers, people themselves often report that time was different. I can't tell you in your terms. So, since the consciousness in which the ancient Egyptians functioned was quite different from ours, maybe they had a different experience of time altogether. And this is not at all as far-fetched as it may sound to many. For example, I'm a pretty ordinary person, but during shamanic rituals and even sometimes during meditation, I have really experienced time in a very different way. Sometimes it went much faster,